Right now, you're wearing a shirt, a pair of pants, and a layer underneath them. You have never been cold. I don't mean you've never felt cold. I mean, you have never been cold the way a human being is supposed to be cold, with no building, no heating, no coat you didn't make yourself, and no way to get warm again except the one you build with your hands. Take it all away. The heating, the walls, the shop with food in it. Now put yourself outside, in the dark, in a landscape where the temperature is below freezing and will stay below freezing, not for a night, for 5 months. Nothing is growing. Most of the animals have left. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. That was every single year for thousands of generations. So what did they actually do? Not how did they survive? That's the easy question. The real question is the one nobody asks. What did you do with the time? Because winter isn't an emergency. An emergency is short. Winter is months of enforced waiting in a world with nothing to eat and nowhere to go. And if all you have is fur and fire, you starve slowly with excellent posture. The answer turns out to be one of the strangest things in human history, because it wasn't just what they built or what they ate. It's that winter forced our ancestors to invent something no animal has ever needed, and you use it every single day without noticing. Hold on to that, we'll get there. Start with the thing everybody gets slightly wrong. In 2020, a team led by Jessica Tierney at the University of Arizona published a study in Nature that finally pinned down the temperature of the last ice age. At its peak, around 20,000 years ago, the average temperature of the entire planet was about 6 degrees Celsius colder than today. 6 degrees. That sounds survivable. That sounds like a bad week in October. And that's the trap. That's a global average. It includes the tropics, which barely moved. Cooling wasn't evenly spread. It piled up at the top of the world. And where our ancestors were living, Europe and northern Asia, that 6 degrees becomes something else entirely. Ice sheets kilometers thick sat on top of northern Europe. Where you're sitting right now, if you're anywhere north of the Alps, was likely either under ice or on frozen open steppe with almost no trees. But here's the number that actually mattered to a human being standing in it. It was never the temperature, it was the duration. You can survive almost any cold for a night. What kills you is the 4th month. It's the fact that nothing will grow again until spring, and spring is 150 days away, and you cannot hunt your way out of it because the animals are starving too. Winter doesn't kill you with cold. Winter kills you with time. So, clothes, obviously. Except the clothing story is not the one you've been told, and the real one is better. Humans were scraping hides and wrapping themselves in skins as far back as 300,000 years ago. Then, around 80,000 years ago, came the bone awl, a sharpened bone spike used to punch holes through hide so you can lace it together. And here's the part that matters. The awl was enough. With an awl, you can already make fitted, tailored clothing, garments shaped to a body instead of draped over it, which raises a question archaeologists had been chewing on. Because roughly 40,000 years ago in Siberia, someone did something insane. They took a bone, sharpened it, and then drilled a hole through the top of it, a hole about the width of a thread, using stone tools. That's the eyed needle. It is brutally hard to make, so if awls already made fitted clothes, why bother? A team led by Ian Gilligan at the University of Sydney published an answer in Science Advances in 2024. Needles aren't for tailoring. Needles are for fine stitching, and fine stitching gets you the thing an awl can't. Layers, close-fitting inner garments, sealed seams, clothing worn under other clothing. If you've ever been properly cold, you already know this instinctively. One thick coat is worse than 3 thin layers. The air trapped between the layers is what keeps you alive. The invention that carried humans through the Ice Age might not have been the coat, it might have been the underwear. And look at when it shows up. Eyed needles appear in Siberia around 40,000 years ago, in the Caucasus 38, in East Asia 30, and in Europe 26,000 years ago, which is precisely when the Ice Age hits its coldest point. That's not a coincidence. That's a species inventing exactly what it needs, right at the moment it will die without it. One more detail I can't stop thinking about. At a site in Wyoming called La Prairie, about 13,000 years old, researchers worked out what the needles were actually made from. fox, hare, bobcat, fur-bearing animals. They were making the needle and the coat out of the same animal. Now, you have clothing, you still have a much bigger problem. You are standing on a frozen plain, and there are no trees. No trees means no shelter, and worse, no firewood. So what do you build a house out of on a landscape with no wood? You use the only large thing available. You use the mammoths. At Mezhirich in central Ukraine, a farmer digging out his cellar in 1965 hit a mammoth jawbone. Underneath his garden were 4 circular structures built out of hundreds of mammoth bones, jaws stacked into walls, tusks arched into frames. At another site, Kostenki 11 in Russia, archaeologists counted 51 mammoth jawbones and 64 mammoth skulls in a single ring about 12 meters across, over 20,000 years old. Now, the version of the story you usually hear is that these were cozy Ice Age villages where families lived for generations. Recent work says probably not. A 2025 redating of Mezhirich puts the main structure at around 18,000 years old and finds the site was used briefly, possibly a single stay, or a handful of visits spread over centuries. These weren't towns. They look more like stations, built where you needed one, used hard, abandoned. And then there's the fuel. Fires at the Ice Age site of Korman 9 in Ukraine were burning at over 600 degrees Celsius, hot enough to matter, and evidence of real skill. The main fuel? Spruce wood, where they could get it. But at Mezhirich, the hearths tell a harder story. Lots of burnt bone, and almost no wood charcoal at all. I want to be careful here because this is where a lot of videos overclaim. Researchers are still working out whether bone was deliberately used as fuel or sometimes just ended up in the fire. But the pattern is hard to ignore. You use the wood when you can get it. When you can't, you burn the animal. You are living inside a mammoth, burning a mammoth, wearing a fox, and eating whatever you saved. Which brings us to the thing that was actually killing people. You can solve cold. Cold is an engineering problem, and humans are extremely good at engineering problems. You cannot solve hunger by being clever in the moment. In February, on a frozen steppe, there is simply nothing there. The plants are gone. There is no meal to find, and no amount of intelligence will conjure one. So the only way to eat in February is to have done something about it in October. And this is where the story gets genuinely old, much older than the Ice Age. At Kesem Cave in Israel, humans between 400,000 and 200,000 years ago were doing something remarkable. They brought back deer bones, and they left the skin on them, deliberately. Why? Because the skin acts as a seal. It keeps the marrow inside from going bad. Researchers led by Ruth Blasco found chemical and cut mark evidence that those bones were kept and then cracked open and eaten up to 9 weeks later. That's a fridge. 400,000 years ago, before our species even existed, someone looked at a bone and thought, not yet. That's the oldest known evidence of a human being saving food for the future. And once you know to look for it, it's everywhere. Daniel Fisher, a paleontologist at the University of Michigan, ran the experiment. He sank meat in cold ponds the way Ice Age hunters appear to have done at mastodon kill sites. It stayed edible for at least 6 months. Cold water, low oxygen, nature's chest freezer. You kill a mastodon in autumn, far more meat than you could ever eat, and you sink it, and the pond keeps it for you until spring. So what did ancient humans do in winter? They ate the past. Every mouthful in February was a decision somebody made in September. But that still leaves the strangest part, because if the food is already stored and the shelter is already built, what do you do with the months? You can't hunt, you can't gather, you can't travel far. You are stuck indoors with the same handful of people in the dark for a very long time. So you make things. Winter is when the tools get repaired, when the hides get scraped and softened, when somebody sits by a fire for hours drilling a hole the width of a thread through a splinter of bone, because that is a job for a person who has nowhere else to be. It's when the carving happens, the beads, the figurines, the stories. Because in a world with no writing, the only place your knowledge lives is in a person, and the only way it survives is if you say it out loud to someone younger. Winter didn't just take. Winter gave them time, the one resource a hunter-gatherer summer never has. The cold season is the making season. It's plausible that a startling amount of what we'd call human culture was produced by people who were essentially stuck inside and bored. And then there's the theory I have to tell you about, with a very large warning attached. In a cave in northern Spain called Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, there are the remains of dozens of early humans, around 430,000 years old. In 2020, Juan Luis Arzuaga and Antonis Bartsiokas published an analysis of those bones, and they found something odd. The damage in them runs in seasonal cycles, growth that stops and restarts, lesions that look like the ones you see in the bones of animals that hibernate. These people, trapped in the landscape too poor in fat to feed them through winter, may have gone into the caves and slowed their bodies down, shutting the metabolism to a crawl and waiting the winter out. Now, be careful with this one. The pushback was immediate, and it's serious. Forensic anthropologist Patrick Randolph Quinney pointed out that there are other, more ordinary explanations for that bone damage that haven't been ruled out. Interrupted growth lines can be caused by things other than hibernation. And there's a blunt objection. The Inuit and the Sami live in some of the harshest cold on Earth, and they don't hibernate. So this is not a fact. It's an argument, and it's still being had. But it's a real argument, made by serious people, published in a journal. And that's the honest state of it. We do not know, which is somehow stranger than if we did. So let's close the loop. I said at the start that winter forced humans to invent something no animal needs and that you use it every day. Here it is. Look at what every single winter strategy has in common. The marrow sealed in a bone, the meat sunk in the pond, the needle drilled in October, the fuel gathered before the ground froze. None of them help you today. Every one of them is work you do now, for a person who does not yet exist, yourself, in 3 months. A summer animal doesn't need that. If food is there, eat it. If it's warm, sleep. But winter makes that a death sentence. Winter says, the version of you that is cold and starving in February is real, and he is depending on you right now in September. That's not just survival. That's the birth of forethought, the ability to sacrifice for a future self. Every farmer, every savings account, every plan you have ever made runs on the machinery that winter installed in us. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, the humans who couldn't do it didn't come back in the spring. Winter didn't just test us. Winter taught us time. You bought a coat before you needed it. You've got food in a cupboard you're not going to eat today. You are, right now, quietly doing the thing your ancestors invented in the dark, on a frozen plain, with a bone in their hands. You just don't have to be afraid of it anymore. They didn't beat winter. They outplanned it for thousands of generations, right up until the season stopped being able to kill us. If you want to keep going back there, the nights, the cold, the things we've forgotten we had to solve, this channel does it every week.